Just go. 1, 2, 3. Let's go. Yeah. Let's go. Yeah. So it's a new song. It's a new song
okay. I wouldn't know it.
Well done. Thank you so
thanks,
much. Wow. Thank you. I had to bring Dr. Ramokgopa to that challenge. It's been making rounds, and yesterday when I did it, I was not sure if I'm doing it right. So I certainly needed someone to come and show me a better way of doing it, and he did. He did very, very well. Thank you so much, Dr. Ramokgopa. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Sanibonani once again. Lochani, Dumelang, Ndimacheroni, Abusheni. Did I say Ndimacheroni? I think it's Ndimacheroni Abudi. Abucheni, Goeiemorgen, morning. All those that are joining us from wherever you are, welcome to yet another session of GTAC 2022. We're so looking forward to having you with us throughout the day. We have a very jam-packed program, very interesting lineup of speakers that you're certainly going to enjoy. But before we talk about a jam-packed program, just want to take you back to reflect on what we had yesterday, and we'll take you through some housekeeping. After that, then we'll start with the program as it proceeds. Remember, yesterday we had a very interesting speaker, starting with our very own acting head of GTAC, that she gave us a good overview of what GTAC was all about, or is all about, how they moved from being a broad winter school to be specific, to focus on some of the nice things or good things that you have to do or have to know about GTAC Winter School. We then moved to Ishmael Momoni out of the National Treasury. That was not pulling any punches, really talking out about the spate of corruption and how it affects our growth as a country. We moved along. We had Shanda that spoke to us about how green economy is quite imperative for South Africa's growth. After that, we had 3 speakers back to back. That was Prof. Ivo Chipkin. We had Prof. Ivan Turok, as well as Andrew Donaldson, that were talking about some of the context of infrastructure and the challenges in South Africa. And they made a very good point, Dr. Ramokgopa, I should say, around the diversification and the intensification of the township, how the townships have moved from being congested in how they are structured, and how has that inhibited growth and has impeded some of the service deliveries within the townships. Pule Sitai came from the National Treasury, and he spoke about the regulatory environment and some of the financing mechanisms that the National Treasury helps the local government to go about their infrastructure service delivery mechanisms. We moved on with David Savage, that joined us online with his panel. That was Tando, Pule, and Andrew. And David and the panel spoke about how municipal intra-governance and expenditure is quite important, especially in the country like ours. We closed off the session then with Matt Glazer, that joined us from Oregon in the United States. Matt spoke with the panel, and they addressed a very important question of fiscal design and financial management of our municipalities. Again, we all know that financial management is quite a big challenge in municipalities. About 64 of the municipalities that were found by the Auditor General last year, most 64 of them at least had financial mismanagement with them. But Matt says the number is higher, and the numbers are there for us to discuss. And these are some of the things that we looked into yesterday, and I hope you did make notes. And if you want to share your reflection, please drop your reflections in the chat. What is it that stood out for you yesterday? I'd like to get a sense from yourself. What did you like about the sessions yesterday? What is some of the key takeaway that you learned yesterday? Or put differently, if someone were to ask you, tell me one thing that you learned yesterday, what will that be? Let me make it much easier for you. If someone were to ask you to write a newspaper headline about what happened yesterday, what would be your headline for reflecting on yesterday's session? Please drop a chat in the chat box there, giving us what you think happened yesterday. And let's reflect as we move along for today's session. Just before we go to the overview, I'd like to take you through some of the house protocols. We see some reflections coming in from Elaine. starting in high note. All right, keep them coming on the screen there. But before we continue there, let's just, for those that were not with us yesterday, or perhaps you want a bit of refresher of some of the housekeeping rules or protocols when it comes to using our facility emits, I'd like to present them to you. If you may pay attention, I think it's also playing on your screen there. Definitely it's on screen. So I want you to look in your screen. You have a welcoming screen that you click on and you become part of the session. It lends you into what we call a reception, or what we call a welcoming room, exhibition room. So there's a lot of things you can do there. You can go to the lounge, you can go everywhere, but let's start looking at what some of the things you can go through. I think the first is you can look at, or some of the things that you shouldn't do in there. It's how to make sure that you use a good facility like a Chrome version 7. It's quite imperative. It makes sure that your speed connection is up to the standard. It also makes sure that you could get a good feed from our studios as well as from the audience online. But if by any chance your studio or your connection is weak, go for the option on your bottom left corner. It's called lower definition. You can click that, then your projection or your feed will be much more better. Coming back to the lounge or the reception, you go to some of the sessions that you want to see, or the schedules. You'll see what's going on. You can choose which schedule you want to have. So during the breaks, we'll be having like 15 minutes breaks. You can click in a break session, and that will let you into the break to network or to see some of the promotional materials, or do what people do during the break sessions. Or if we ask you to move from one session to the next session, you just come on schedule, you look across the next session that needs to go, and that's exactly where you need to click, and it will take you to joining the other session. And when you're in the session, then you can do a couple of things. Like now, I've seen some of you have already started. You can chat, that it's typing and sending your messages through, or you can have a Q&A. So here's a striking difference here. There's a chat and there's a Q&A. I saw yesterday some of your questions fall through the cracks because they were marred in the busyness of the of the charts. So if you really want to have your questions being answered or being responded to or being recognized, go to the Q&A. There are two tabs. One is chat and two is Q&A. So you want to use the Q&A and ask your questions that you need. And yet remember, there are a lot of questions that may come, and someone may have a similar or the same question that they want to ask than you. So if someone has asked the question that you think you'd like to have a response on it, upvote it. By upvoting, you just click on it and then it gets up the priority list. We'll know that it has a high interest of all the audience. All right, I think you come back to the reception where you can see where you move, and then it will take you to the next session where you in a social lounge. Social lounge is quite a fascinating feature. I found quite a few of us yesterday went to the social lounge. That is practically where you sit with the colleagues around the room. You just exchange contacts, you network, you form relations there. It's quite a beautiful space visually. It's done. Think about if you were in an in-person event, you would go to a reception room or a lounge room where you have your tea, you'd have your drinks. It's the same principle here, where you just come and network with all the colleagues that are present in the call. All right, let's look the last one, exhibition. Exhibition, it's also on the top. You click exhibition. It has all the information that you need. If there's anything you want to know about GTAC, how it started, how it's going, or you want to express your interest to join GTAC, you go to that particular segment, you click GTAC. You can also do the same about the National Treasury. You can do the same about the Jobs Fund. All the resources will be there when it comes to getting some of the information about our institutions. And finally, remember there are resources that are available for you at your disposal. You can check those out. Also, be so kind to follow us on our social media: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. All of it is GTAC South Africa. So GTAC South Africa, please do the right thing to follow us there or interact with us. And our roving hashtag for the throughout the winter school is hashtag GTAC Winter School 2022, hashtag Winter School 2022. The good news is we'll be reading some of the tweets that will be coming through today, some of the Facebook comments, some of the LinkedIn messages. We'll be reading them out to the world for you to get the recognition that you deserve. So that's housekeeping protocol. I wanted to bring you up to speed to it so you could really get a sense of how to maneuver and navigate our MITS system. Remember, we have a poll. Each and every session that ends will have a poll that you rate, evaluate, assess, analyze the session that has just incurred, that help us to improve, and it also gives a good feedback to some of our speakers that have contributed. And there is also a survey. A survey is different from the poll. A survey will be after the whole session for today. You'll have sort of a puzzle on the top right. If you just look closely at like a puzzle on the top right, you click there and that will take you to the survey. You could do a survey throughout and really get to give us a feedback that we need. I did say it yesterday that breakfast feedback is a breakfast of champion. Yes, that's correct. I did say that feedback is a breakfast of champion, and we really need that breakfast for you to give it to us, and we know that we are in a good space to go as we proceed with the winter school and in the future. I saw a comment once again coming from Elaine. Elaine says, make sure that you write down the GTAC website address. Go to our knowledge hub and search the more than 700 knowledge products. Yes, that's 700 knowledge products. You will find the knowledge products from previous winter schools, great research, learning, etc, etc. It's all about development. Yes, go to the GTAC website. It's gtech.org. I think it's gov.za. That will really help you to get all the necessary information. As you heard, over 700 resources at your disposal. You can't go wrong. All right. We'll proceed. And now that we are done with the setting up the scene and really getting to, up to speed, how we use the facility and how we use all the information that is available to us, just want to bring you to get a sense of what we need to expect today. If you look at your program, we do have Dr. Kgosientso Ramokgopa, who is joining us live in the studio, beaming live from the Visual Studio production in Midrand, and he'll give us his keynote talking about infrastructure and related area or questions. And we'll zoom into some of the infrastructure and how it plays out, in particular to service delivery in the metros and some of the cities around the countries. A fascinating session will come where we have some interactive sessions that will be run by Prof. Gesi, who's also here in the studio, that will talk about system thinking, and that's where you'll have also a chance to contribute to some of our system thinking design. We'll lastly hear from some of our good students that just came from the United States through the Emerging Markets program in the New York from the Fordham University. These students will take us through a journey of how they experienced the journey first to travel after the COVID-19, and what opportunities did they find and how they can also pass those opportunities to you. We'll hear about from them a little bit later on in the session. Remember, hashtag GTAC Winter School 2022. We are live on all the social network. And if you're joining us from Facebook, the link is there. You can just click it now and be part of this live interaction with us. All right. Now I want to introduce our keynote speaker for the day, Dr. Kgosientso Ramokgopa. If you thought you knew football and you thought you are good at football, I can take a challenge up with Dr. Kgosi and let's see how good you are. They don't call him Sputler for nothing. That's where it came from, being good at football, and they call him Sputler. And for today, we'll call him Dr. Kgosientso Ramokgopa. And he's the head of Investment and Infrastructure Office in the Office of the Presidency. That's in the Presidency, in the Union Buildings. Just a bit about Dr. Kgosientso Ramokgopa. He's Googleable. If you don't know him, I'm not sure what you are up to. But let me tell you something here that perhaps you didn't know. Dr. Kgosientso Ramokgopa is currently the head, as I said, of the Investment and Infrastructure Office in the Office of the President of the Republic of South Africa. Before this, he was the Gauteng MEC. MEC is the member of the Executive Committee for the Economic Development, Agriculture and Environment. Previously, Dr. Ramokgopa held a position of the executive mayor of the city of Tshwane between 2010 and 2016. At the same time, he was one of the youngest mayors of the metropolitan in South Africa. His previous positions include holding the position of the Chief Executive Officer of both the Metropolitan Trading Company and the Johannesburg Market. Previously, Dr. Ramokgopa was the Deputy Chairperson of the Board of Trade and Investment in Limpopo Province. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you're sitting comfortably there, probably with your coffee on your hand. And as you do that, please help me welcome Dr. Kgosientso Ramokgopa. Over to you, sir.
Do I come here?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for the generous introductions and let me take the opportunity to thank the organizers for having extended the invitation for me to come and exchange with you my views on infrastructure, but also get to learn from your contributions, because I think it's not an echo chamber, it's not a one-way traffic. I am likely going to learn immensely from these discussions today. So thank you very much for extending that learning opportunity to myself. Let me also just indicate that infrastructure is not outcomes neutral. I know that the tendency is to look at infrastructure through a technical lens, but infrastructure is meant to achieve particular objectives, and those objectives are in the main political. And there's a rich body of evidence throughout history that illustrates the contribution of infrastructure in the rise of certain political players, but also the dominant economic thinking of the time finds expression in infrastructure. Although my presentation will be littered with numbers and graphics, I really want to just indicate that the infrastructure is not outcomes neutral. So it's what I refer to, something that is not adequately examined, is what I refer to as the political economy of infrastructure. Like I said, I mean, if you look how the United States came out of the Great Depression, President Roosevelt introduced what he called the New Deal. The New Deal was doing a number of things. The first major thing that the New Deal was doing was just the reconfiguration of the American public policy, economic policy. It shifted more to the left, if you like, the Keynesian, if you like, policy interventions, and that advocated for the state playing an interventionist role in the economy. So the state must be the principal driver of the economy. So almost moving away from the idea of a trickle-down effect, that the market will have a solution and resolve the social tensions in the economy. And that's so Roosevelt, in fact, ending the third term as the president of the United States. And then much later, post the Second World War, America, of course, was not an active participant in the Second World War, was concentrated in Europe, especially the fight against the fascist Hitler, a coordinated assault by the British and the Soviet Union at the time. and really, Europe was devastated as a result of the Second World War. And the United States then entered the space. And the view there was that the United States must take a view on ensuring that there's economic recovery of Europe, but also America saw Europe as an opportunity for exporting its goods and also addressing the issues of capacity utilization in the manufacturing industry of the United States of America. And the principal driver really of the Marshall Plan was infrastructure. Like I said, it was the reconstruction of Europe. Of course, it also had political dimensions, political nuances, essentially stopping much later the expansion of communism in Europe, creating a bulwark to undermine the expansion of the USSR. But at its core, it was about the reconstruction of Europe. And then we know that with the COVID-19 situation, many parts of the world, the United States, the Biden administration has introduced a package of measures to address the economic recovery or to bolster economic recovery. In the US, is introduced a package of infrastructure interventions of about 2 trillion US dollars to help to fix the roads, the bridges. At the heart of that, like I said, is the reinvigoration of the American economy. The Europeans have done that, about 1.8 trillion euros, a coordinated attempt by the European bloc, what we call the EU, to ensure that there's a recovery of the European economy there. The British have done the same. The Chinese have done the same. Of course, China started much earlier in 2012 through what they call the Belt and Road Initiative. Again, a 2 trillion US dollar intervention to make sure that China's ambitions just beyond its domestic borders gets to be entrenched, and there's a significant presence of Chinese interest using infrastructure on the African continent. So what is the point I'm trying to make is that there's a very rich body of literature and also evidence that illustrates the significance of infrastructure in the recovery effort, and also the political ambitions of these major superpowers in the world. And then let's bring it closer to home. The president unveiled what we call the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, essentially a set of 6 interventions that was co-created with the social actors, business, community, and labor were some of the protagonists in the authoring of the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. Of course, it talks about interventions on addressing in the immediate the energy deficit. At the time, it put it at about 2,000 megawatts. Now we know it's anything between 4,000 and 6,000 megawatts of energy deficit that needs to be attended to allow the country to grow at levels as envisaged in the national development plan. And then it talks about the need for reforms, Operation Vulindlela, a cooperation of National Treasury and the Presidency to respond to, if you like, the levels of inertia that underpins the South African economy and undermines the ability of private sector to participate in the South African economy, and therefore in the long term undermine our growth prospects. And then also about mass employment, creating 800,000 job opportunities in the immediate to ensure that people who have lost their jobs as a result of businesses closing are able to fend for themselves and find meaningful job opportunities. And the one that is relevant to our conversation is around infrastructure. We must unlock 1 trillion rands of infrastructure investments in the next 4 years. So I'm making this presentation against that backdrop. So I'm making the point that all that I'll be saying It's not outcomes neutral. It drives a particular political agenda, and it gets to manifest itself primarily in the economic space, the economic domain. It's about the spatial reconfiguration of the country. It's about extending opportunities to the poor. It's about ensuring that we achieve universal access. It's about resolving the urban-rural tension. It's about the equitable distribution of the democratic dividend in the country. So infrastructure, its intention is primarily to address the social conflict in society. So the point I'm making, the risk of repeating myself, is that infrastructure is not outcomes neutral. So what is, I'll be covering just those three areas. The first one is around the overview of infrastructure investments in the country. I've made reference to the National Development Plan. This is an overarching framework for development in our country. I think it was introduced in 2012, again, a product of extensive collaboration and conversations, not just restricted to the domain of the political actors, but non-political actors were involved. All manner of people, voices, organized voices, were part of the construction of the National Development Plan. It articulates the South Africa that we want by 2030. It also elevates some of the aspirational ambitions that should be achieved by 2030, amongst others, universal access, the quality of healthcare, the quality of education that will be offered in the country, and also that levels of unemployment should be at about 6%. And of course, we know that we are far from those many of those targets. And one of the things that is understated, or at least in the public space, is that the NDP also advocates for a situation where investments in the South African economy, what we call gross fixed capital formations. Of course, CF is made up of 6 areas, and I'll share some of those with you in the course of the presentation. Is that gross fixed capital formation should be about 30% of GDP. And that must be achieved upstream of the aspirational targets of 2030, because it's likely going to facilitate the prospects of us achieving those aspirational targets. And of course, we are far off the mark. And as we speak now, I think we're sitting at about 12.9%. But the point to be made there is that the contraction of investments in the South African economy has little to do with COVID-19. The COVID-19 induced economic responses, the issues around the lockdown. If you were to go just before the arrival of the pandemic, you'll see that the country was facing adverse economic headwinds. The levels of unemployment were also rising even at the time. Many of the socio-economic indices were going south. So COVID really accentuated an already dire situation. And of course, it represents an outlier. So if you had to look at the trend with regards to investment leading to COVID-19 since 1994, you'll see that we only reached the peak at around 2008, what I refer to as the golden years in the South African economy, and we reached about 22% or so. So it was still lower than the 30% that is envisaged in the NDP. Of course, the NDP came much later than 2008. But the point to be made is that there is no point in the recorded history of the post-apartheid South Africa where investment in the South African economy was above 30%. And that explains, if you like, the degree of the lackluster growth of the South African economy. So what is illustrated there essentially is that there's an investment gap of about 4.8 trillion rands at 2030 values that needs to be breached to allow us an opportunity to achieve the kind of targets that are advocated for in the National Development Plan. And also what the NDP says is that two-thirds of these investments must come from the private sector, and the public sector will be responsible for a third of this investment. So what is the message there? The message there is that whilst the state is the primary driver and guardian of the South African economy, the state must be interventionist, the state must direct where these investments must happen, but the significant proportions of investment is going to come from the private sector. And therefore, by extension, the state must create conditions that makes it possible for private sector to participate, what we call the crowding in effect of the private sector. So we are far off the mark. So you can see that we need about 259% increase in public investments and 268% increase in private sector investments. And one of the things that the office has done in order to ensure that there's a framework for investments, there's some degree of logic and rationale in how we invest in infrastructure, we then put together the National Infrastructure Plan. So remember that there's a hierarchy of plans, if you like. The NDP is uppermost of this plan, is the apex of the planning frameworks in our country, and then the National Development Plan, the National Infrastructure Plan, in fact, is one of the layers that seeks to support the National Development Plan. And this was approved by Cabinet after extensive engagement with the public and organized voices in society. And the NIP takes two twin tracks. The first one was to focus on what we call foundational network industries, energy, transport, and on transport, the focus was on freight transport, and much later we're dealing with commuter transport. And then the third area of the foundational network industries is water and digital communication is the last. Why these four? Because these are the ones that introduces greater levels of efficiency in the economy. They ensure they increase mobility, access to opportunities. They allow us an opportunity to ensure that there's a spatial reconfiguration of South Africa to ensure that we undermine the apartheid spatial planning, so that the opportunities get to be extended to everyone, the social cohesion, there's densification, and also we're able to reduce the carbon footprints because people are traveling lesser distances to access opportunities and are likely going to use non-motorized forms of transport to access those opportunities. So we've put this together and also developed in the course of the NIP. What are those immediate interventions that needs to be put in place to address the infrastructure deficits in the country? So you know that infrastructure is collapsing. Of course, local government is a sphere that is sphere of government closest to the people. The collapse of or non-functionality of wastewater treatment works, water treatment plants, potholes. You can see the quality of just overall infrastructure that is being offered is in the state of collapse. So we then make proposals on what are these interventions that ought to be made, but also we make the point around what is the financing instruments that must make this possible, because we do accept that there's a significant contraction of the fiscal headspace as a result of the COVID pandemic. Our fiscal runway is becoming shorter and shorter. So we must find alternative financing mechanism to support, if you like, the fiscal resources. So there has to be innovative financing instruments that is supposed to back this infrastructure initiative. And then just on the local government, I have made the point that local government is a sphere that is closest to the people. It makes it possible for people to have a greater appreciation of their lived experiences, access to opportunities. So if local government doesn't work, the whole country will not work. So what we have done is to do a, if you like, a geographic dispersion of infrastructure investments in the country, and the outcomes are really telling. The first thing is that there's a concentration of investment in your major metropolitan areas, in particular the 5 big metros in the country. So that is the 3 metros of Gauteng, Ekurhuleni, Johannesburg, and Tshwane. You go to KZN, it's just limited to eThekwini, and then you go to the Western Cape. It's just the levels of investment or concentration of investments is only in Cape Town. So what the map conveys to you is that where you see a deep green, that's why there's a concentration of investments, and then where you see a red, it means that there's investment famine. There's a lack of investments in those spaces, and we know that there's a correlation between investments and the quality of life, investment and growth in those areas. So what this means is that the people of the Northern Cape, Eastern Cape, parts of the Free State and parts of Limpopo and Mpumalanga are denied of access to opportunities, and that results in unmanaged movement of people from the rural hinterland, because those spaces where there's lack of investments are largely rural, and the quality of life there has not improved. In some instances, it has deteriorated, even with the victory of the democratic project. So there's an avalanche, huge numbers of people that are moving into urban spaces, in particular those 5 metropolitan areas. And that's why we talk of, if you like, the exponential rise of urbanization concentrated in those spaces. It results in levels of informality. There's a proliferation of informal settlements in these metropolitan areas, and it undermines the ability to plan by the leadership of these metropolitan areas, and it results in, like I said, squalor, crime, and all manner of things that they undermine the quality of development in these spaces. And that's why when you saw the July riots of last year, the concentration or the hotbeds of those uprisings were largely in your major metropolitan areas, because the encounter of people in those spaces is such that there's high levels of deprivation. The levels of inequality are more pronounced. I mean, the most best example of the contrast of the quality of life is in Johannesburg, just across the M1. On the one side of the M1, it's excess, it's obscene levels of consumption, it's affluence, it's abundance. And this, I'm talking about Sandton. And just the other side of the M1 is destitution, is squalor, it's people who are living on deficits, and I'm talking about Alexander. So you can see the nature of the tension that is given rise as a result of the inability of the planners in this space to provide for the levels of urbanization, because they can't comprehend the magnitude of people that are coming into those spaces. So we have distributed, or if in fact displayed this in terms of the 52 districts in the country. There's 44 districts plus the 8 metros. So you can see the concentration of the green is really in those urban, if you like, metropolitan areas. So essentially, the metros are the principal drivers of economic growth in our country. And in fact, collectively, they've surpassed the nation sovereign state in terms of their contribution to the economy. I mean, just the 5 metros account for over 60% of the total economy of our country, over 50% of the population of the country. So these are spaces that requires urgent attention. But equally, that should not be done at the neglect of your more rural spaces, because there has to be an equitable distribution of opportunities. Again, here we're simply making the point that the metropolitan areas are surpassing, if you like, the other districts in terms of the ability to attract investments into those spaces. Like the slide says, they contribute more than 50% of investments over that period. And this really is to show you, so the gross value add is the total value of goods and services less the inputs that have been produced in that geographic area or in a particular sector. So you can see that COVID-19 had a major dent on our ability to grow the economy. But what is the message I'm conveying? You can see that the trend line, if you like, has been negative over a period of time. Of course, now it's ramping up, if you like, the hockey stick effect, because we are moving from from a low base. But essentially, there has been significant levels of negative growth of gross value add, and that undermines our ability to grow as a country. And it's got a relationship on the quality of infrastructure investment, the ability for us to ensure that we undermine leakage, the ability for us to ensure that we spread the opportunities across the length and breadth of the country. And again, this I'm just an illustration of what has been the trend line with regards to the districts. Again, this is really an emphasis of the point that I was making earlier on. So the districts in KwaZulu-Natal and the Western Cape have got relatively high disparities amongst each other. So this is the point I made earlier on. So if you had to go to KZN, the concentration of investment is in eThekwini at the exclusion of other districts. And that's why there's a movement of people into those spaces. People are occupying wetlands, floodplains, and that's why the devastations of the flood in eThekwini was largely as a result of people locating in areas that are not appropriate for human habitation. And the floods has really ravaged those areas where people were living along the river banks. So I'm saying that is a function of the inability of a democratic state to ensure that there's an equitable distribution of opportunities from an infrastructure perspective. And underline, I didn't say equal, it will never be equal, but it should be equitable. And people are moving into this spaces seeking for opportunities. You go to the Western Cape, the concentration is in Cape Town and the areas of Stellenbosch, the farming community, and the rest of the Western Cape don't have those opportunities. And then you go to areas like the Eastern Cape, everyone is equally poor. So what the message says is that I'm talking about the disparities between the districts in relation to gross value add. But when you go to the Eastern Cape, so it says the Eastern Cape, everyone is equally poor. So there is no, if you like, a more pronounced, if you like, deviation with regards to people's lived experiences from an income and their lived experiences. But when you go to areas in KZN and the Western Cape is different. And then there's issues around local government finances. Of course, I've taken the approach is more finance-centric because we're talking to finance practitioners from GTAC, but I want to advocate for a situation where we also focus on service delivery, because I think there's a religious preoccupation in the country around clean audits. So yes, clean audits, I mean, you can't congratulate a fish for swimming. Those things should be done as a given. There has to be clean audits. But what gets to be measured as the performance of municipalities is the degree to which you are able to extend opportunities and provide for the poor and the marginalized in those spaces. So, I mean, it's very easy to obtain a clean audit. Having been a mayor, all you do is to make sure that I don't commit a mistake and therefore I don't spend. My books looks good, my balance sheet looks good, the levels of liquidity is high, but when you go to the lived experiences of people, it's quite different. So the point I'm making here is that, of course, we need to look at the capital expenditures. That those allocations that are given to you, a fiscal allocation, are we spending that money? And on average, we have done a modeling or an assessment and longitudinal study. About 43 billion rands of allocations remains unspent in this country. That's tragic. And I want to suggest that that's criminal in the face of hunger and poverty that we are facing. Just imagine the kind of improvements would have made to the lives of our people. Outside the issues of leakage, inefficient spending, and all manner of things that are confronted at the local government level. So it's important that we focus on these matters to ensure that they were able to drive expenditure at the local government level, so that we're able to extend opportunities to to the poor, the marginalized, and just the general community in those areas. I did make a point that there's a correlation between infrastructure investment, growth, universal access, and the quality of life. So the more we underspend, the more we undermine our ability to improve the quality of lives of people in those areas, the more we are reversing, if you like, our march towards the realization of the NDP aspirational targets. Of course, National Treasury makes the point around the need for us to ensure that 8% of the total value of your asset must be invested towards maintenance, because what we do in the country is that when you look at the project life cycle, there's very little attention that is given to elongating the lifespan of the asset that we are creating. So there's an obsession of just creating an asset, and once we complete building this road, we go to the next road without any attention given to the implications for the maintenance of the assets that we are creating. And that's why there's a rapid deterioration of the asset base in the country, and we know that you spend more in replacing an asset as opposed to maintenance. So we need to institutionalize the discipline of ensuring that we pay particular attention to the maintenance of the assets. I mean, the potholes that you see in many parts of the country when you drive to your shop, taking your kids to school, are not structural, are a function of our inability to ensure that there's proper maintenance in addressing these issues going forward. I've made the point around some of these issues, and of course, the point that to be made here is an indication that the issues around the capital expenditures requires attention. But what has been the trend line is that public sector capital expenditure has been decreasing over a period of time. So you can see that there's a kink since 2016. Of course, there was a rise in the investment, and then it keeps on coming down. So the point we are making is that the state needs to ensure that we are a bit more aggressive in the spending. So not necessarily advocating for new money, but spending what is allocated to you. To municipalities, to provinces, and national governments, and to the SOEs. And then the next conversation must be about the quality of those investments that we are making. We must undermine leakage, or what you call corruption. Of course, in many instances, some of the issues that requires attention is the capacitation of local authorities. There's been a hemorrhaging of skills, both the financial and engineering skills at the local government level, provincial and national government, and it undermines our ability to plan, to conceive of projects, to plan and implement. And therefore, there's an over-reliance on the private sector to be able to deliver. If you like, what is our primary mandate as the state? Ensuring that there's universal access. Of course, there are issues that requires attention. The first one is that, in my view, is that there has to be a merit-based and professional recruitment in the public sector. There's a lot of people with huge skills, that significant amount of skills and experience are excluded from the public sector because of the machinations of the public sector. So it's important that we professionalize the space and ensure that the right people occupy the most appropriate position in government, accelerate the levels of recruitment. It's not unheard of in government. To fill a chief director position can take you 8 to 9 months. Almost a lack of appreciation of the speed that is required for you to recruit. Of course, you must address the issues of incentives, because we are competing with the private sector for the same skills, especially the more financial and technical engineering skills. It's important that we provide, if you like, a solution with regards to incentives. A lot of people are not attracted to the rural areas. Sometimes it's not about the benefits, direct benefits that come to you as an employee, but it's about the quality of life in that space. You are not able to take your kids to the best schools. The roads are not surfaced. You don't have access to water because you are not a part of the municipal grid. You still use long drops. You don't have waterborne sanitation. So people are not attracted to those spaces. And as a result of people not being attracted to those spaces, I'm talking the the required skills to address the issues of infrastructure deficit, it results in those levels of underspending, because we can't plan, we can't implement, we can't monitor. And that explains the concentration of investments in the more urban spaces, because these municipalities, the metros, can provide the kind of incentives that you want, but also the lived experience, the quality of life, better schools, connected to municipal grids, you are living in security estates, so people are more comfortable there. So we need to think of a ways of making interventions in those spaces, and that's why as the office we are advocating for a shared service. So a shared service simply means you aggregate the skills at the district level. As and when local authorities require those skills, you go there, make an intervention so that they were able to benefit from the aggregation of the skills. And as a result of poor levels of underinvestment, so you can see that the secondary sectors of manufacturing and construction have been suffering. They've experienced negative growth, and we know that those are the areas that gives you the highest labor absorption capacity, and that explains the high levels of unemployment. It's because construction and manufacturing are suffering, and that's where you could be absorbing the kind of or absence of the skills that are there. So our unemployment problem is not necessarily structural, it's our inability to ensure that we elevate the supply side. So for us to be able to improve manufacturing and construction, we must improve aggregate demand, and that's why our office is working with the various spheres of government and SOEs to ensure that there's a healthy, robust and credible pipeline of infrastructure projects in the country. And this is an articulation of how the MIC gets to be allocated. I will not go that far with you. Of course, the management of finances and the state of municipalities undermines the abilities of this critical sphere of government to drive the economy of our country. And you can see it's in a dire state, and I'm sure you are very familiar with that. I will not burden you with what that is. So what are some of these challenges in conclusion that we are facing? The financing of infrastructure. I did say that we are running short of fiscal headspace, so we need to find innovative financing mechanisms. We need to work with the private sector. We have introduced the infrastructure fund, 100 billion rand facility for blended financing. The state is prepared to take the first loss. We are crowding in private sector investment, but there has to be significant investment in project preparation. You don't just create a credible and robust project pipeline out of the blue. It's not an act of God. You have to invest in project preparation, and there's been significant underinvestment in project preparation in our country. That's why there's a high failure rate of projects when they go to BFI. Projects are not properly conceptualized. When you come to implementation, there's a high failure rate. Those things requires resolution. There's issues around the procurement space, the fact that the triple Ps only constitute 2.3% of the total pie of public sector investments in the country. We need to improve that. Of course, there's a revision of the triple P framework. But my lamentation is that your problem doesn't reside in the framework itself. My point is that your problem resides in the inability of those charged with packaging these projects in the public sector, not having the necessary or requisite skills to package projects so that they lend themselves to be funded and financed through the debt capital market. There's no equitable risk allocation. The state is always at the receiving end because we don't have an appreciation. We don't have the lack of skills, the right skills, in the public sector to address those. So really, in conclusion, is that infrastructure is going to be a primary driver of our effort going forward, but it requires the right skills. It requires an equitable distribution of investments, allocation. It requires that we look at the alternative forms of financing. We should go into the debt capital markets, but like I said, invest in project preparation, professionalize the space, ensure that we employ on merit and put people in the right positions, provide the right kind of incentives. And in this way, we should be able to achieve what the New Deal was able to achieve for the United States under Roosevelt. We should be able to achieve what the Marshall Plan did for Europe. And I think as a country will remain a primary driver of the African economy. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Program Director.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ramokgopa. It feels odd that I'm the only one clapping here, but I can tell you now that hundreds of the participants there, you could see on the screen, they're showing you some love, they are giving you thumbs up, even some are throwing shades. They're really loving your session. Thank you so much. We highly appreciate it. You beautifully framed a discussion for today. You've set a nice context for us to pick up from. I think what you did nicely linked with what you spoke about. Some of the speakers yesterday spoke about how some of the money in the local municipality doesn't translate into, money has been sent to municipalities, but it doesn't translate into real projects. Yes. The multipliers are a little bit lower than what we expect. That gives a nice gap between yesterday and what we're gonna do now over the next session. We out of time. I won't be taking any questions. We will have the next session, but I think maybe because we have like 2 minutes, just to get your sense around how do we. I think you spoke about some of the challenges that we have when we come to money being, is there, but we don't have infrastructure projects. Spending is not there. Is it the lack of certain is not the lack of money, but it's the pipeline is dry, right? And how do we make sure that excuse me, we get bankable projects, especially at the local government, to the pipeline that we are able to see the results instead of having money going back to the treasury?
Yeah, like I said, I think there's evidence to support the statement that we're not sitting with a money problem. Of course, in the long run, you are likely going to sit with a money problem if there's efficiency of spending. Like I said, I mean, if you had to look at your major metros, they've got the capacity to conceive of projects because they've attracted the right skills. They exert themselves in ensuring that they package projects in a manner that lends itself for accelerated implementation. And some of them, at the time when they could, they are able to raise money through the debt capital markets. Of course, we've been downgraded, so a lot of them can't go through the debt capital market. But you can see metros are the ones who have been active in that space. So my view is that two things must happen, repeating what I said earlier on. We need to set aside money for project preparation so that we have a quality project pipeline. And we focus that the project preparation in your non-metro municipalities so that we are able to improve the health of the project pipeline. And then once we have that, you don't necessarily have to burden the fiscal. So not all projects require fiscal support. There are good quality projects, if they were to be packaged correctly, that can find the financing through the debt capital markets. And we relieve the fiscals because they are underpinned by durable, resilient revenue streams.
That's correct.
So it's how you structure that project from a revenue point of view, that the private sector will be attracted. And of course, now we have the instrument of the infrastructure fund, blended financing. It's going to ensure that it helps to bridge that financing gap. So the issue is around the resources on project prep, getting the right skills in government to ensure that we do project preparation, and then the effects will be felt downstream. But to think that suddenly there will be a healthy pipeline of project without any effort, I think is a height of folly. And that's something that we are conveying at every opportunity we get to make a presentation in cabinet. We're going to the Lekgotla next week. We're making the same argument. You can't expect to unlock 1 trillion rands of infrastructure investments and you only allocate 400 million for project prep, when you know the general rule of thumb is anything between 3% to 8%. So it's insignificant in the context of that which you want to achieve. But 400 million is a lot of money. But put it in the context of what you want to achieve is really insignificant.
But here's a question. I mean, there's whilst we do have those challenges on an institutional level, quickly your thoughts around the construction mafias, those that demand I think 30% for the construction to carry on. How does that affect the actual mostly well-prepared projects from the pipeline to the delivery, especially in local government?
I must say it might be a controversial statement. I think in some instances it's exaggerated. Let me tell you, there are two parts to the conversation.
Yeah.
There's genuine community interest to participate in projects, and they have a right to demand to participate in projects.
Yeah.
And they raise this thing cordially to say to the projects contractors, we want to participate. They are brushed aside, and when they take resort to other means, then they are called construction. That's not construction mafia.
Yeah.
It's a genuine community interest, and those should be accommodated. A framework must exist for them to participate, and that's why social facilitation is key. In many instances, by the way, we get to visit projects.
Yeah.
On a weekly basis, we're out of our offices, we're on site visiting projects. And when you get to understand, no, but there's a genuine community interest, they are entitled to that, and then you resolve the matter is gone. And then there's genuine construction mafia, those who are fleecing projects. It's a criminal matter. The police must make intervention. They are organized, by the way. They've got tentacles across the country. I think their intelligence must just pick up who these people are, address them. Of course, if you don't do that, so you are going to undermine our ability to roll out projects. Social facilitation, community interest defined within a particular framework is going to help us to resolve these challenges.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ramokgopa. Thank you so much. I appreciate your thoughts. Those were the thoughts of Dr. Ramokgopa there, as you've heard, really giving us a good frame of what we need to talk about going forward. I saw a few of your questions and your questions there on the chat box, and I hope over the next session we'll be able to, our speakers will reflect on those, because really what we're doing here is to set a foundation for what we're about to do next. The poll is up for you to complete it, and you can rate the session, give evaluation, give good points. I saw you showed some love to Dr. Ramokgopa there. The poll is up. You can start doing it. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to move from this session, and you exit the session. You join the next session with Nozipho, and I think it's Nosipo, if I say it correctly. Nosipo Hlatshwayo. Yes, that's correct. You join the session, and we'll see you on the other side. Thank you, Dr.